reminds me a lot of some foundational patriots in America. In the fall of 1776, there was in the southernmost part of Manhattan Island a statue, an equestrian statue of George III. And it was made out of lead. Well, at that same time, up in Bowling Green, on the northern part of Manhattan Island, there was an encampment, and in that encampment was General George Washington. The revolution had just begun, and they just received a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And they took that copy, and they decided to read it to the troops and to the people who gathered there near the encampment for George Washington. And so the general ordered that it be read, and it was read. And in that Declaration of Independence, there's a second paragraph, of course. And at that very moment, when that second paragraph was read, we became a people. We became a distinct people in the history of the world. Nowhere else were these four principles that are articulated in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence communicated to a public where they understood immediately that this meant the birth of a nation in which our rights would be protected from the government. What are those four principles? That all men are created equal. What does that mean? That means that at birth, no one here is a king or is entitled to a nobility of one kind or another. We are all equal. We are all the same, equal. That doesn't mean that we have equal talents, but it means that we are equal under the law. And in addition, that we are endowed by our Creator, by God, with certain unalienable rights, among them the rights to life and to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. This too was unique. Suddenly, it was recognized that our rights came from God, not from government. And then a third principle, that the very purpose of the government, that it is instituted among men to protect the rights of the governed. That's the very purpose of this new extraordinary government. And then the fourth thing was that a just government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Up until that point, the world knew the divine right of kings. Sir Robert Filmer wrote a book called Patriarcha, defending the divine right of kings. What was that? That God divined a king to have all rights, and that anyone who wished to act had to do it by leave of the king. The king was the embodiment, was God's emissary on earth, and was the government. And this earth-shaking movement out of this thing called the Discourses on Government, the second treatise on government of which John Locke wrote, and that became the foundation for Jefferson in writing the second paragraph. All right, they're assembled here. They hear this language. And they are driven to a point of frenzy. They are so excited about this opportunity. And what do? They run down Manhattan Island to the southernmost tip. They take that equestrian statue of George III, which they hated, which represented the divine right of kings and oppression and deprivation of individual liberty, and they overthrew it. And they tore it down, and they broke it into pieces. And they melted those pieces, and they made them into mini balls. And those balls were shot into the redcoats as a part of a war to achieve American independence. Now, you'll see by the time we finish this discussion that it is this motivating factor this drive for individual liberty to protect our rights that is now very much an issue again. And the body of people here, a small band of individuals who believe in liberty, are essentially the same as they were in 1776 when they tore down that statue, when they melted it into mini balls, and when they prepared to go into a revolution. Now, we are not there to the point of revolution, but the threat is as great, and we have to avert it. I'm Jonathan Emory, and I'm running for the United States Senate, and I want to introduce myself to you. So I came to Washington, D.C. during the Reagan administration. I was a 23-year-old kid. I just got out of law school. I started a PhD program in constitutional history, and I got a call from a guy named Jerry Fritz, who was the assistant to a fellow named Mark Fowler, who was the chairman of the FCC under Reagan. And they said, "How'd you like to work for the FCC, Jonathan?" And I said, "Well, I don't think the FCC should exist, so how should I go to work for it?" And he said, "That's exactly why we want you to come to Washington. Because you see, the people in the Reagan administration understood fundamentally a point he made many times, that our government is the people's government, but that our government is bound by a constitution which imposes limits on power, and that only if we respect the rule of law and respect the Constitution will we survive as a nation." Reagan told us that freedom is only one generation away from extinction. We did not inherit it in the bloodstream. We have to pass it on to each new generation, and we have to fight for it and defend it. Or one day in our sunset years, we'll have to tell our children and our children's children what it was once like to be free in America. We don't want to go there. All right, so here I am, a young kid in the Reagan administration. When I left the Reagan administration, we did deregulate things at the Food and Drug, or Federal Communications Commission. In fact, we so deregulated things that it enabled people like Rush Limbaugh and Tucker Carlson to actually have a place in the media. Because there was a thing called the Fairness Doctrine, which prevented stations from having controversial positions on public issues in the time. If they had one side of a controversial issue, they could lose their license. The FCC could investigate them. Under the Fairness Doctrine, they had to have balanced programming. It was editorial control by the federal government, intimidation of broadcasting. We got rid of that, and then Rush Limbaugh came, right? And then also Tucker Carlson. Well, then I left the FCC and I went into private practice. And one of the first things that happened to me in private practice was a test. You see, throughout our lives and all of our lives, we have tests about our integrity. We have tests to determine whether or not we are going to give in to evil, whether we're going to ignore it, or whether we are just not willing to stand up and fight against it. And so I had one of those experiences. A partner came into my office and he asked me, "Jonathan, I want you to draft a pleading in defense of the Fairness Doctrine." Now, the Fairness Doctrine, as I just talked to you about, violates the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. It puts government in the position of exercising editorial control over private broadcasters. Well, I knew that violated the First Amendment. And I came to Washington to fight against that. And I swore an oath to become an attorney to defend the Constitution. And here I am, in my first big opportunity with a law firm in D.C., the partner's standing right in front of me, and he says, "Jonathan, I want you to draft this pleading in defense of the Fairness Doctrine." And I looked at him and I said, "I can't do that." And he looked at me quizzically. "What are you talking about? I'm the partner, you're the associate. I just gave you an assignment." I said, No. It's not that I don't want to work for the firm. It's that I cannot do what you're asking me to do because I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, a part of which is the First Amendment, and the Fairness Doctrine violates the First Amendment." He said, "Whoa, you're an associate. You do the work we tell you to do. Do you realize what you're talking about is insubordination? Do you realize you can be fired for insubordination? Do Do you realize if you're fired for insubordination, you will never have a job in the law in Washington again? No one's going to hire an attorney who was fired for insubordination. Rethink your position. I said, I did. You say, okay, what is it? I'm not going to write a pleading that violates the First Amendment. I'm not going to do it. I can't. I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. That's what I intend to do. Okay, all right, I'm going to bring up with a partnership committee that you are being insubordinate, and you are going to be fired. See ya. So I'm sitting there wondering, okay, am I going to continue to be employed? And then what happens? Well, in comes another partner. It's about a week and a half later. And he said, Jonathan, you can't be insubordinate. You can't refuse to do the work of a partner if they ask you to do it. Now, in this instance, we're going to let you off the hook. Just this once. But if you're ever asked again to do an assignment, and you say you won't for some principle, then you'll be fired. I said, okay. And they never asked me to do any work that would violate my principles. But the point is, we need integrity in the people who run for office. We need them to have moral principles. We need them to have a belief fundamentally in the Constitution of the United States, which now hangs by a thread. Let's talk about a little bit more. So the last 38 years of my professional career, I have been a federal litigator against the government. And during that time, I've defeated the federal government, the Food and Drug Administration, more times on constitutional grounds than any other attorney in American history in federal court. Now, I went up against the best that the Justice Department has to offer, and many liberal judges. And despite all of that, I won. So what I want to say from this is a lesson, which is, no matter where we are in life, if we are the last person on earth who believes in liberty, if we are surrounded by enemies who want to destroy our Constitution, and we are, we must fight doggedly against it. We must do everything in our power. We must be willing, as that first generation of Americans was willing to do after 1776, to die for our country. We must be willing to do whatever it takes to save the Constitution of the United States and to ensure that liberty survives. And we are in the final stages of a very vicious battle. We have a population that is largely asleep. We aren't, but so many Americans are looking the other way. But you know what? They can be inspired to wake up. They can be inspired to act. They can be inspired to understand the truth, which is we are in the majority. We are in the majority. It may sound like all of the radical leftists in Washington, D.C. are in the majority because they're loud, they're vocal, they're on all the major media, but they aren't. And we have been hoodwinked. Now let's take a look at the record of a man named Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine is an interesting human. He is a person who really doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't. You can't go from one extreme to the other on a fundamental matter of principle and be a person of principle. When Tim Kaine started his career running for mayor of Richmond, he needed some money. And a man named George Soros came to town. And George Soros gave him $50,000 for his race to be mayor of Richmond. Now, that was 25 years ago. And you see, Tim Kaine became a very good friend of George Soros. And in fact, he is now a very, very good friend of Alex Soros, George's son. Now, who are the Soroses? Well, you know what? They're enemies of the United States. Now, why do I say that? Because George, in his book, wrote in favor of global government. He wants a totalitarian government to rule the earth. He's a globalist. And he believes that the United States is the principal impediment to a global government. And he believes that we have to destroy the American economy and open America's borders and break down our criminal justice system to reduce America to the point where American nationalism, sense of identity, and sense of exceptionalism will be driven out of the country. And then we will become part of a global community. And we will be willing to humble ourselves to a global government superior to our own. Now, this man is a very good friend of Tim Kaine. And Tim Kaine in Instagram, if you look at the post, it is there from Alex Soros. Alex refers to Tim. He says, "I love this man." And who brought the Soroses into the position of being the primary funding party for the Democratic National Committee and for Democrat candidates nationwide? Who did that? It was Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine did that when he was the chairman of the Democrat National Committee. He introduced the Soroses and their money to Democrat politics in a big way. And then there came the Kaine-Clinton campaign, or the Clinton-Kaine campaign. And when it came to asking for the big bucks, $100 million. Hillary didn't want to ask her old friend George directly because Tim had a better relationship with him. So she invited Tim to make the ask, and he got it. And that's where that picture on Instagram with Tim Kaine and Alex Soros smiling, looking at each other with the "I love this man" came from. It was that dinner meeting. Now, why do I bring this up? Because we have to know who we're dealing with. Tim Kaine will never fix the border situation. In fact, he's introduced no legislation whatsoever to secure America's borders. Never. Not a single bill. Not a single bill, not a single action on his part. Why? Well, could it be that George Soros and Alex Soros are behind the open border movement? He will never introduce legislation on that point. He will never secure the borders. Let me tell you something about the borders. I was down there 4 weeks ago. Let me tell you about the borders. I was there with the CBP chief, and it is appalling. In the San Diego sector, over a 50-mile area, there was one CBP truck with a single CBP agent in it, with a single sidearm. He polices the whole 50 miles. Where are all the other CBP agents? They've all been reassigned. Where? To human processing. What is human processing? I went to the human processing center. You want to know what it is? It's a 130,000 square foot tent with cathedral ceilings, massive, constructed by the Marines. There are many of these, a dozen or more. And in each one of them, there are illegal aliens. And each one is seeking asylum in the United States. And in each of these tents, there are pods, what they call pods. And these are clear plastic dividers, which have basically the size of this room. And in this area right here. And inside each one, they have yoga mats all on the ground. And the yoga mats are about 6 inches apart. And there is on each yoga mat an illegal alien, and that illegal alien has a space blanket on. It's a silver blanket. It's a dystopian nightmare when you walk through. All right. This is over and over and over again. There are watchtowers in there. In the watchtowers, there are CBP agents, one agent in each watchtower. There are video screens up there. And they watch all of, say, 6 pods, 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, for each one of these towers. Because they are always fighting, and there's rapes and all sorts of horrible things. That's why they make them lie down in there on the yoga mats, so they don't engage in that. And when they do, then they have a panic button up there in the tower, and they bring in a team of people to grab these people and put them in holding. All right. All of these people are to be processed under the Biden rule, under Alejandro Mayorkas's rule. Alejandro Mayorkas, by the way, was said by Tim Kaine to be doing an outstanding job as DHS Secretary. Under this rule, they have 72 hours of processing. What does that mean? That means within 72 hours, they do this. They sign up each one for welfare. They sign up each one for food stamps. They sign up each one for cash. They give them cash. They give them access to free medical care. They give them access to a free education. They give them a little card, and it has a number on it, and that's to be used instead of a social security number so they can buy a car, so they can get a license. And then they ask them, and they give them a phone, and they can call anywhere in the world with a phone. All of this is at our expense. And inside the phone, they have a tracking device. But when you open the phone, you can take the tracking device out, very simply. And you put the phone back together, and it works without the tracking device. So there are trash cans filled with the tracking devices, because they all know how to take it out. And then what happens? They ask them where they want to go. And then they break them up based on where they want to go. And then they put them on CBP buses, and they take them to the train station, and take them to the airport, and take them to the bus terminal. And then there are fully federally funded NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We're paying for it, 100%. And they buy their tickets, and they go wherever they want in the United States. Now, who determines immigration policy? The cartels. Not immigration naturalization. The cartels determine who comes into this country. The cartels decide. These are criminal organizations. They are terrorist organizations. They're letting in MS-13, 18th Street Gang, Bloods, Crips. They're letting in all sorts of gangs. They are letting in sex traffickers. They're letting in drug traffickers. They're letting in families, but they like to separate them. And they like to sex traffic kids. And they like to put the kids with gang members, because then they can come through the asylum route and they get signed up for welfare and food stamps and all this. I'm walking along in the tent. The CBP chief says, "You see this man's tattoos on his neck? He is MS-13. I said, "Why don't you take him out?" He said, "We can't." The Biden administration rule, the Alejandro Mayorkas rule, is that only if they're on the Interpol list or on the terrorism watch list can we take them out. If they're not, we are not supposed to make any judgment about their tattoos or any other aspect of them. And he said, "We know that these people are coming in and they're not a real family, but we're not allowed to question them. And they come in groups of 4 because they realize they'll get over $3,000 in cash if they do that. This is an endless, bottomless pit. This is endless invasion of the United States. We cannot survive this. We're talking about, they say hundreds of billions are being spent on this. No. They say 8 million illegal aliens are in the United States. But the CBP knows otherwise. And they know that that number is probably a half, at least, of the actual number. And they know that they are bringing into the United States, by order of Alejandro Mayorkas, by order of this administration, criminals. And they are sending them to where they want to go in the United States. That's one problem. What is Tim Kaine doing about it? Nothing. You know, timidity in the face of evil is complicity with evil. It's not that Tim Kaine's oblivious to this. He's fully aware of this. It's not that Tim Kaine doesn't understand the consequences of it. He knows that the fentanyl is killing 5 Virginians a day. He knows that fentanyl is killing 130,000 Americans a year, and next year it may be 60% higher. He knows that sex trafficking is rampant through Virginia. He knows that drug trafficking is all throughout Virginia. He knows that the border is the problem, but he will not do anything to secure the border. And that is just the way Alex Soros would like it. And then the second thing, let's talk a little bit about inflation. Why do we have so much inflation? Why is everything at the grocery store increasingly becoming totally unaffordable? Why is that? Why is it? The reason it's happening is because too many dollars are chasing too few goods. What does that mean? We are living in a time of the greatest expansion in the amount of federal money in the marketplace in the history of our country in spades. The government is spending $2 trillion more each year than it takes in. $2 trillion more. We have a $33 trillion debt. When it was $24 trillion, they said it was unsustainable. It's $33 trillion now. With that amount of money poured into the economy, it forces the price of goods and services to go up. And then there's another factor. It's called the climate change agenda. The climate change agenda under Biden is designed to eliminate all fossil fuels within 10 years of his election. All of them. Now, that is insane. It's insane because no society on earth that has any wealth exists without fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the backbone of the economy. The climate change agenda is driving fossil fuels out, and that is increasing the price of gas and oil. So this explains why the price of gas keeps going up, and why it's near $4 a gallon, and why it will reach $4 a gallon and more. And the Biden administration wants that. Now, Tim Kaine oftentimes tells people, I'm not for higher gas prices. I voted for the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, you know what? The Inflation Reduction Act puts trillions of dollars into the climate change agenda. It doesn't reduce inflation. It increases inflation. It increases the amount of federal dollars going into the market. And this combined thing, higher prices because of the massive amount of federal money coming in, and higher prices of gas because of the Biden administration's efforts to destroy fossil fuels, is killing us. It is impoverishing us to the extent of over $8,000 per person since the start of the Biden administration. We are paying out $8,000 on average a year beyond what we earn as additional expense. It is a tax. And it's only going to get higher. And what does this mean? This means that there are many people who cannot afford to eat. Yes. Who must decide whether to buy the drugs they need or buy food. Who have to decide how they're going to afford to drive to work and how they're going to make ends meet. This is why our credit card debt now is massive, because everyone's maxing out their cards. Now, who's responsible for that? Remember, timidity in the face of evil is complicity. Tim Kaine is not oblivious to inflation. Tim Kaine knows what's happening with inflation. He knows the reason why there is inflation. But he will never tell you the truth about it. And the reason is that power depends, in his mind, on government control. On all of these projects that he's willing to expend trillions for. On all of these woke agendas for the military. On all of these social agendas that he favors. Now let's talk a little bit about that. Tim Kaine, during the McAuliffe effort to defeat Governor Youngkin, then candidate Youngkin, mouthed the party line. And what was that line? McAuliffe said. McAuliffe said CRT, critical race theory, is not being taught in Virginia schools. Well, that was a lie. And the parents in Loudoun County saw it firsthand when their kids had to stay home from the pandemic, and they're looking on their screens at the classroom, and they're hearing all this crazy communist stuff about how race needs to divide us, and how people who are of color will never succeed in America because they say America is systemically racist, that there's no opportunity for someone of color here, that every institution in our society, government, schools, private sector, is all systemically racist, that we're rotten to the core, that there's no way to save America, we have to destroy it. And that's what they teach kids of color. And then the kids who are not of color, white kids, no matter what a person they are, how good of a person they are, it doesn't matter. Because they're white privileged. Because the color of their skin determines their interaction with everybody else. Because they will always be given an advantage in this systemically racist culture. So they will always form an elite. And the children of color will always form this servant class, this abused class. And so they agitate for revolution. Well, Tim Kaine agrees with that. But when he was asked about whether critical race theory was being taught in Virginia, he said the same thing McAuliffe said. It's not being taught in Virginia. It's not an important issue in Virginia. He's an artful dodger. But it becomes even more significant when you realize that his wife, Ann Holton Kaine, was the Secretary of Education under McAuliffe, and she brought critical race theory to Virginia. So he lied to us. But you know what? Lies are the currency of Marxists. It's the currency of a Marxist. The ends justifies the means. That's why the Constitution doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's an impediment to their ends. They're dissatisfied with us. They're dissatisfied with our nation. They think transformational change is needed. That's the language of Chuck Schumer. That's the language of Nancy Pelosi. That's the language of Tim Kaine. What is transformational change? Transformational change is taking us from a constitutional republic and a limited government to a totalitarian regime. Now, 3/4 of all federal law is the product not of those we elect, but the unelected heads of over 250 federal agencies, departments, and bureaus. 3/4 of all law. Under Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, only Congress can make law. The Founding Fathers intended only Congress to make law. There was a thing called the non-delegation doctrine. And John Locke introduced this concept. It was because we have a compact with the government, we as the people, because we're sovereign, And we have agreed to a Constitution that has vested all the power to make law in Congress. Congress, the government, cannot redelegate the power to make the laws to another entity. But you know what? That's exactly what happened. And it happened a long time ago, 1886, with the Interstate Commerce Commission. And then it got worse and worse with the Roosevelt administration, then with Lyndon Baines Johnson, then all the way up to the present. So now we have almost all law made by people we don't elect. Made by oligarchs, bureaucratic oligarchs. We don't have a constitutional republic. We have a bureaucratic oligarchy. All right, I've mentioned a number of things for which Tim Kaine is responsible. There are many other things. For example, Tim Kaine endorsed Elizabeth Guzman. Who is Elizabeth Guzman? Elizabeth Guzman is a member of the House of Delegates who introduced a bill to make it a felony in Virginia for a parent to try to dissuade his or her own child from transitioning. Hear that? If you tell your child anything to interfere with the child's decision to have operations, in the case of a girl, a hysterectomy and a mastectomy, in the case of a boy, chemical castration, and you as a parent are appalled by that, as you should be, and want to object to it, well, Elizabeth Guzman's bill would make it a felony in Virginia. So you could be arrested. So the rights of your child could be protected. Well, who endorsed Elizabeth Guzman? His name is Tim Kaine. So Tim Kaine will not answer a specific question. You ask Tim Kaine, are you for transitioning of youth? He will suddenly become the Artful Dodger. He never answers directly. Any controversial issue, you put it on him, he won't answer it directly. He says, oh, transitioning is not an important issue in Virginia. There's a very small percentage of people who are transitioning in Virginia. I believe in children's rights. I support children's rights. Well, you know what? Parents' rights trump children's rights. When they're juveniles, they're in your custody and your control. Our Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, looks to citizens and parents, as the court has said many times, to determine the upbringing and education of your children. You are in charge of their discipline. They are your children. Until they are adults and have reached the age of majority, when they can make their own decisions, they are under your control. You may not abuse them. You may not engage in criminal activity with them. But you certainly can protect their interests, and there's no greater instance of child abuse than the transitioning of children. The sexualization of children going on in our schools is depriving them of their innocence and is leading them to think that their genders are fluid, which is an absolute lie, and is encouraging them to think that they should be able to change their gender, which is impossible, change their sex, which is impossible. So you mislead them. You use the term gender, which is broader than sex of the child, and you suggest to them, you start off with, oh, your gender is fluid. Oh, little boy, you like Barbie dolls. Okay, maybe you're really a little girl. Have you ever thought, maybe you're a little girl? And you little girl, because you're a tomboy, maybe you really are a boy. How about that? Think about that. Oh, you say, little girl, you are a boy? Let's celebrate that. Came out of the closet, let's celebrate that. This is what's happening in our schools. And then they allow them to go to the counselor, and the counselor tells them, as he's required by law to do, nothing to contradict them. Oh, you think you're a little boy? Okay. Well, let me recommend a physician for your parents. The child should go to this physician. He won't object, the physician won't object. So, oh yes, well, you can have an operation, you know. So you can have an operation that destroys their ability to procreate, that makes them permanently maimed as a child before they have any real scruple about the world or their own sexuality. They are destroying these kids. They're maiming them. And this is federal policy, and this is policy Tim Kaine will not act against. Timidity in the face of evil is complicity. This is evil. Tim Kaine will do nothing against it. Not a thing. Not a thing. This gross act of child abuse, not a thing. And then let's talk about the recreation of Title VII. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was designed for the very purpose of protecting women and girls, of allowing them to have their own sports teams, of allowing them to excel in competition among themselves. It was considered an extraordinary thing when it was passed, for the benefit of women and the development of girls' sports and the protection of girls' privacy and the protection of girls and women from discrimination. Well, now Title VII means this, according to our Department of Education, according to our President of the United States. And you know what? Timidity in the face of evil is complicity. As far as Tim Kaine is concerned, this is not an issue in Virginia. Northern Virginia, you got Fairfax County Public Schools, Loudoun County Public Schools. All of them now adhere to this agenda. What does it mean? It means biological males who declare themselves female can enter into any girl's bathroom, any girl's locker room, and participate in any girl's sports. This is destroying the security and the opportunity of girls. This is a program that is designed for the very purpose of basically eliminating women's protection and rights. When women and girls cannot feel safe enough to even go to the bathroom or go into a locker room or have the confidence of knowing that they can participate in sports and excel in it, they've lost opportunity, they've created fear, they've invited sexual abuse and rape. Because that's what happened in Loudoun County. And even in the face of that, Loudoun County has done this. Loudoun County had a superintendent of schools named Scott Ziegler. Scott Ziegler suppressed all this information, so he refused to reveal the knowledge they had about what happened. What happened? A guy named Scott Smith, his daughter, was in a Loudoun County public high school. The school adopted this policy. Biological males declare themselves female, they can go into the girls' bathroom. A boy comes to school, he's dressed in a skirt, says, "I'm a girl." They let him into the girls' bathroom. He accosts and rapes Scott Smith's daughter. They suppress it. They keep it out of the public. They deny it happened with their knowledge. And then what do? They took the boy and they didn't put him in a juvenile detention center for 20 years. Instead, they moved him to another Loudoun County public high school where he proceeded to sexually assault another girl in the girls' bathroom again. So the point here is simple. We're not idiots. We know about the need to protect women and girls. And so, looking at all these issues then, I've described the problems, I expect solutions. As a voter, I expect the people that run to give me specific solutions. And as a candidate, I believe it my duty to tell you specifically what I will do. Now, this is not popular among politicians, and thank goodness I'm not one. This is the first time I've ever run for an office, and I hope never to have to do it again. I'm doing it because I'm driven by this idea that within the next 2 to 3 years, if we don't fundamentally change the direction of our country, we will lose our freedoms. We will lose our economy. We will see this government take over most things that we cherish, including, as you see with our kids, the fate of our children, which is most important. Our children are being indoctrinated with Marxist doctrine. Our children are being made vulnerable. They're being led to lose their sense of identity. This is what the Maoists do. This is what the Maoists did in the Cultural Revolution. And they're doing it in our schools. They're not teaching the 3 R's. They're teaching them race politics. They're teaching them gender politics. And they're telling them in everything they do that the most basic identifying characteristic of you, little boy, your boyhood, is non-existent. You can be whatever you want. Your body doesn't define you as a boy. When you kill a sense of self-identity in a child, when you sexualize them early, when you make children think that their own country is evil, when you make them think that the only solution is to destroy their country, is it any wonder that we have, by one of the most recent polls, 42% of those from 18 to 35 asked if they would defend their country if it were invaded like the Ukraine is by Russia? And they said they would not. First time in American history that that number of young people has not been willing to defend their country from invasion. It's because they are under assault. They're being indoctrinated. So what do? Well, on this transitioning issue, it's simple. I will introduce legislation to make it a federal felony for anyone to aid or cause the transitioning of anyone under the age of 18. It needs to be illegal. When it comes to biological males entering girls' and women's sports, I'll introduce legislation compelling the government and all recipients of federal funds to ensure maximum protection for girls and women from the risk of rape and sexual assault associated with these common bathrooms by ensuring that they have separate bathrooms. We need to get back to what worked. And so we need to force this issue. And we need to compel it by withholding federal funds. And then in addition to that, we have a sex trafficking problem. And the solution is twofold. We have to fix the border. So what do we do about the border? The border invites all sorts of problems. We have terrorists in our midst. You realize that? We have an open border for 2.5 years, of course. We have terrorists all throughout the United States. And I mean various kinds of terrorists. There are 2 kinds of terrorists, really. Those that blow things up, and they're in this country for sure. And then those that destroy our institutions, that become a part of them and destroy them. This is where the Muslim Brotherhood comes in. The Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood in the 70s and 80s came to Herndon, Virginia, acquired a major strip mall, and broke it up into component parts where they created nonprofit entities that then were designed to do various things. Infiltrate education, infiltrate the local and state governments, infiltrate the federal government. They want to destroy the United States and replace it with a theocratic dictatorship. This was allowed. Over the last 2.5 years, according to Manny, the CBP chief that I mentioned, we have had an unlimited number of people from the Middle East, many of whom they suspect are in Hamas and Islamic Jihad and in Hezbollah, come into the United States and come all across the United States. The FBI doesn't know where they are. Perhaps it's because that little device that's inside the phone can so easily be taken out and the phone still works. They don't know where they are. The whole thing is insane with the borders. How do you solve it? This is what we do. We not only complete construction of the border wall, but in addition, because DHS is so corrupt, Alejandro Mayorkas has put in these globalists, these Soros types who don't believe in the United States and believe in a global government and believe that the borders have to be kept open to create this destruction of the United States, to achieve global governance. These people are in layer after layer of the administrative leadership of DHS. They're not going to go away. Even if we fire all of them, there'll be litigation forever. And it is so embedded into this DHS that the solution, which we need immediately, has to come a different way, and this is the way that I propose. Block grants to the border states, of those border states willing to defend the border, to hire police and National Guard sufficient to protect the border. Because they have a direct interest in protecting their own citizens, and they've shown their willingness to do that. We give them the money, we give them the opportunity to hire the police and National Guard, and we get the job done. And then the last thing we do is we make it absolutely prohibited for any illegal alien to step 1 foot into the United States. And if you do that, you will be permanently denied citizenship, and you will be prosecuted, and you will be ejected from this country. So what do we do instead? Anyone who seeks asylum has to do it in the United States Embassy in their country of origin or in an adjacent embassy, but not in the United States. So we amend the immigration laws to change the asylum laws to assure that outcome. Now, when it comes to inflation, we have to dramatically cut government spending. Dramatically. We need to repeal the legislation, the multi-trillion dollars of legislation. Tim Kaine never voted against a single trillion-plus spending bill in his entire career. He votes for all of them. We repeal them all. We not only do that, but we adopt a bill I wrote for Congressman Ron Paul, who's endorsed my candidacy. Congressman Paul had me write a bill called the Congressional Responsibility and Accountability Act. Basically, his office asked me, Jonathan, can you come up with a simple measure that will basically neuter the administrative state, because it's doing so much damage, and because 3/4 of all federal laws made by these administrative agencies, and it violates the separation of powers. Congress is supposed to make those laws. So this is the bill. Every proposed regulation will have no legal force or effect unless adopted into law by Congress. Boom, their power's gone. And every existing regulation will be sunsetted within 3 years unless passed into law by Congress. Uh-oh, there's the massive federal register, and it's gonna shrink. And then what do? We get rid of certain departments and agencies because they never should have been there in the first place. They don't have a constitutional foundation. All the agencies don't have a constitutional foundation. So what do? Well, we have to get rid of the Department of Education. It's doing a smashing job, isn't it? We have such exceptional students. We have the highest levels of education achievement in this country, in the history of the world. We're so low, we can't even get kids to even break the median on the ACT or the SAT. We have kids graduating from high school and they cannot read. We have to change this. Get rid of the Department of Education. It's going to help. We get rid of the Department of Education, and we need in Virginia true school choice. We need to allow parents, when a kid is failing or when they have a problem with a school, which is everybody, to take their kid out of the school, to receive the money that is allocated for the education of that child, and to take that money and to go to whatever educational institution they want, and create competition to the schools. We know competition works. Mm-hmm. That's how we solve that problem. But then in addition, we cut the government spending, we get rid of specific agencies, Department of Commerce, Department of Education. We can devolve to the states everything that DHS is doing and get rid of DHS. And we can also eliminate several federal agencies. In fact, there are over a dozen that I have listed. Among them, the Federal Trade Commission. And we can even get rid of the Food and Drug Administration. And how do you do that? You know, you can create a statutory scheme for the private review and approval of drugs. Testing. No drug in this country that is approved is independently tested. You know that? Every drug is tested by the drug company sponsor itself. It's an inherent conflict of interest. The FDA is a patsy for the drug industry. The drug industry controls the FDA. And you know what else we need to do? We must never again have mandates. Never again should we force the American population to take a drug. Never again must we have a government that compels our citizens under threat of losing their job, or being kicked out of the military, or being kicked out of the police, or being kicked out of their nursing job, or being kicked out of a hospital because they refuse to be vaccinated or refuse to wear a mask.
Amen.
We're a free people. Our Constitution cannot be suspended because there is a cold virus or even a COVID virus. Our Constitution remains in place. The solution to our problems is not a one-size-fits-all government mandate controlling our population. The solution to all novel medical problems is innovation. That's how we've overcome all of these problems in the past. It's innovation. It's medical innovation. And how do you have innovation? You don't have innovation by censoring speech. You don't have innovation by the government, the White House, CISA, which the government created, the FBI, as we now know from the Twitter files, censoring through big tech complicity, private speakers who dared criticize the vaccine, who dared suggest that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine were effective in early treatment of the disease, who dared challenge the influence peddling scheme of the Biden family. Their sellout of the entire United States for their own personal financial benefit to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, coming into joint accounts held by Joe Biden and Jim Biden and Hunter Biden, from enemies of the United States, including communist China, oligarchs in the Ukraine, and elsewhere. No one who does that meets the definition of an American. No one who sells out this country for personal financial benefit should see anything other than a jail cell. He betrayed our country. There's another great betrayer of our country, and it's an F word. It's not 4 letters, it's 5. And it's the most offensive F word there is. It's Fauci. Fauci. Fauci betrayed our country. How did he do it? Well, my friend Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, has the goods on him in detail, and he's waiting for the Republicans to take control of the Senate. When that happens, Fauci's number is up. And what is it? Fauci betrayed our country by choosing the Wuhan lab and Colonel Xi of the PLA as the source for the gain-of-function research necessary to take an otherwise innocuous virus and turn it into a lethal virus that would be spread throughout humanity. In 2007, they asked Fauci, aren't you worried, in an interview at a university, aren't you worried that the gain-of-function research you're doing around the world, and they called it gain-of-function research, and he responded without saying, oh no, it's not gain-of-function research. He said, the question was, aren't you worried that the gain-of-function research being done all over the world with the assistance of the United States might result in a pandemic? And he said, that's the price we have to pay for scientific research. Who appointed him the ruler of all humanity? The determining factor of whether millions would live or die. And yet he made that decision. The blood of over 1,200,000 Americans is on Anthony Fauci's head. And how do we solve this? We ban the mandates. No more mandates. Absolutely none. We stand up for the Bill of Rights. We stand up for individual rights. We use the power of persuasion in this country. You want to persuade someone to take a drug, you go right at it. You can tell them anything you want as long as it's truthful. Tell them what you want to say. But allow those who challenge what you say to have an equal right to communicate. Don't suppress what they say. The First Amendment of the Constitution requires it. And so we're going to enforce the First Amendment. There's a bill that Rand Paul introduced, and I'm going to help him with this bill. I'm going to give him full support for it. It would make it a felony for any person who is employed by the federal government to collude with the private sector, media, and big tech to censor anyone. Can't do it. And that would make it a felony for them to do so. And that bill was in committee, and it was blocked by Bernie Sanders. Okay. All right, we've talked about a lot. Now, I know we've covered a lot of terrain. I apologize for having to do this, but we have a lot of problems. And I just want to conclude with a statement of belief and philosophy that I think we all share. There is no more important value in the history of the world than individual liberty. There's nothing more important. Our whole country was founded on individual liberty. Individual liberty is inextricably tied to God. Our rights come from God. We must defend religion and freedom of religion in this country. But we must not defend religion if it is used as a cover for terrorism. So if you say you are a Muslim, I say congratulations. You're a person who believes in a God. I salute you for that. But if you say, I'm going to kill all Jews and Christians because I'm driven to do so by my interpretation of the Quran, I'm sorry. You are an enemy of our people. You are a person who has to be eliminated. And this vacillation of the Biden administration, where they don't give Israel full support, where you have a country, Israel, the most loyal country to the United States, our greatest defense in the Middle East against terrorism. You have terrorists, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah, attacking Israel in the most brutal form imaginable, even beheading children, raping women, absconding with children, taking them into captivity, brutally burning people. I mean, the most barbaric forms of violence. People with no conscience in the world, driven by a fanaticism that leads them to destroy innocent people. And you show sympathy to them? You not only show sympathy to them, you agree to fund them. And Cain voted for that legislation. You agree to give them money through international organizations. And here's the thing. This is why we are getting a bad rep around the world. It's not because America is a colonial power that abuses people. It's because an American president has chosen to abandon our basic principles and to curry favor with radicals in Iran, giving them the opportunity to make a nuclear weapon, to curry favor with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, to not condemn them, to urge Israel to engage in an extensive ceasefire whereby these people can regroup and commit further atrocities against Israel. We need to get out of the way and let Israel do the business of getting rid of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah. They are terrorists who will slit not only an Israeli's throat, but our own. They mean to destroy all Christians and Jews worldwide. They have said as much over and over and over again. So, we have a strange fellow in Washington named Tim Kaine. And the problem with Tim Kaine is that he is not representing us. The problem with Tim Kaine is that he thinks that government power and decision-making to govern our lives is more important than our rights. And he is willing to sacrifice our rights, as he was during the whole COVID epidemic, in agreement 100% with every mandate, even to be the last person in the government to agree to a cessation of the state of national emergency on COVID. That is because he believes in government control. That is because he believes that the government knows better than you do what is in your own best interest. That is because he does not represent you. That is because he has betrayed you. That is because this man thinks he knows everything necessary to determine how you live. He's not a friend of a free market. He's not a friend of individual rights. He's not a friend of the Republic. He is not a friend of the Constitution of the United States. He does not believe that you have to follow the Constitution of the United States. He thinks that the ends justify the means. And remember, for all those instances in which Tim Kaine has not taken action in the face of evil, that timidity in the face of evil is complicity.